Please welcome Ray Zepeda here to the Rio Grande Valley.
Well, again, I appreciate that introduction. It's quick to point out, being from South Texas in the Coastal Bend area, I'm smart enough to know that, anybody north of San Antonio thinks that anything south of San Antonio is a valley. And I know that that's not necessarily true at all. But it's so good to be here. Bert asked me if I could come down, and we've had a lot going on, but I said yes immediately, because anytime I come down here, it's just a great time. Great people, and to see a full room of officials who are working on their craft to get better, anything that I can do to help, I wanted to do that. Again, he gave you a little bit about my background, but I'm gonna fill in a little bit of blanks. I coached for 20 years, started coaching in Corpus Christi, coached there for 3 years, coached the majority of my time in the Houston area. And then after stopping coaching, I was an assistant athletic director and athletic director in Cy-Fair ISD in the northwest part of Houston, and was there for 10 years. And pretty big district. We had 12 high schools and 20 middle schools and 17,000 athletes. And so when Bert says, hey, I've probably seen, everything that there is somewhat to see, I think that that's somewhat true. I've been in education for 31 years, just completed my 31st year. And I'm gonna, I guess, get started with a little bit of a sport really outside of basketball, and then come back to basketball. A couple of weeks ago, I know that everybody down here knows about this, but I saw the most incredible thing that I've seen in 31 years of being involved with athletics. I was literally holding the state championship MVP plaque in my hand and watching the end of a last game of a long state tournament, watching Weslaco play Waco Midway. And, Weslaco had one out, immediately got one out. I walked out. Once they got the one out and they're down 6 runs, I grabbed that plaque and I went into the bullpen and was going to sit there and watch the end of it. And lo and behold, there were 7 batters that came up to the plate with one out, down 6 runs, and Weslaco just starts chipping away. Never more than a single base, 4 singles, I think 2 walks, a hit batsman, and then that sophomore comes up and belts that grand slam to win the game, to walk them off. And I've never seen anything like that at all in 31 years of athletics. And, after the game, just the first thing that I did, I think that's what I do now as an athletic administrator, is I watch moments. And so I think, first of all, I started looking at those Weslaco kids and the community behind them. Man, it was awesome. You talk about experiencing the thrill of victory. I mean, that girl floated around those bases. But I quickly started watching the Midway kids, because you can imagine what it felt like to hit a grand slam, to walk it off and win your first state championship for an area of the state where athletics is super important. But I watched those Midway kids, and they literally dropped to the ground where they were. So then I started watching their coaches and what their coaches were going to do to go pick those kids up and dust them off. And it was amazing to watch how the Midway folks handled that situation. But I thought later, as I kind of left the stadium, and you got to see what makes athletics great in that moment. The passion of the home run, the success that kids experience, what it means to communities, the lessons that can be learned both from the winning and the losing. It was awesome. So I know that that's been a big point of pride down here. They started breaking out that 956 champ pretty quickly when they were rounding those bases. And I talked to the coach later, and I'm going to tell this story, and maybe you guys have heard this. The coach said that the young lady, the sophomore that hit the grand slam, that she had been in a big slump. I think she had 2 hits in the playoffs. And so he's telling her when she's coming up to the plate, hey, you need to stay back and just make contact. And he said that she turned to him and said, "Coach, I got this." And he said, "Oh, okay, you got it." And I don't know if y'all know, but I think she had a 3-2 count on her. She was down 2 strikes when she hit that ball over the fence. So what an amazing moment. That was an awesome thing. Again, most awesome thing I've seen in 31 years in being involved with athletics. It was an amazing moment. Awesome for those kids. Great for this area of the state. It was awesome. I'm going to take you back, and we were just talking about this, to a not so awesome moment from this year. Okay, I was at the state tournament. It was Friday morning. Boys were playing 8:30 in the morning game. And by Friday morning, which is our second to the last day, we've gone through now 2 weeks, and we are probably at that point at around game number 30 or 29 for the 2-week period of the state championships. Very close ball game between Lipan and New Home. Both teams had over 30 wins. Into the game situation, close game. New home is down. 0.3 seconds on the clock. Timeout is called. And coach is drawing up a play. So I'm thinking there, I don't know much about basketball. You know, Bert told you I coach football, but I knew that, you know what, 0.3 seconds, think they only have time to probably tap this ball in. So ball's inbounded, a kid catches the ball, double clutches, puts the ball up, shot goes in, clock sounds. And I thought, man, that's interesting. How did that happen? You know, next thing I know, the official's running over there to the monitor. I jump up immediately from the table. I grab our basketball assistant athletic director, and you're going to see him here in a second. And we run over to the monitor, and we're walking across the floor. And you can imagine the new home people are going crazy because they feel like they just made an unbelievable play to win a state semifinal. Meanwhile, on the other side, they're crushed. But coach is griping because he just saw them catch the ball, double clutch, put the shot up, etc. Right? And I'm walking across the court with our assistant AD, and I said, hey, they didn't have enough time to do that, did they? I mean, I'm not an expert, but isn't that right? So unfortunately, Calvin wasn't on the floor at that point. He was up in the press box or up in one of the boxes. And after that game, I said, Calvin, you're not going to be going up to the box anymore. You're going to come sit at the table with the rest of us. Long story short, officials finally got that right after we kind of all conferred and ended up waving the basket off. Because as you guys know, because you're here getting trained up, right? You don't have enough time with 0.3 seconds to catch it, double clutch, and shoot. Okay, there were several things that could have been done differently in that moment, right? There was a timeout. So it wasn't just ball out of bounds and you don't have much time, but there was a timeout, and those officials could have got together, and we were just talking about this, and could have made sure that everybody was on the same page of what the rule was, could have communicated with each other, right? I would have liked them also to have maybe sit after they conferred to go over to each huddle and make sure everybody's on the same page there. But they didn't do that. Of course, the coach that ended up having the basket waved off was very upset. He's yelling at me at the end of the game, and I asked him, I said, Coach, what's the rule? I said, what's the rule? I said, 0.3 seconds, what's the rule? He said, you only have time to tap it in. I said, okay, so we got it right. And he says, yes, but. I said, yeah, but we got it right. But I say that here at the outset to say, man, that was a tough moment, right? But it shows how critical it is, like what you're doing is, of making sure that you're competent, that you've got the capacity, that you understand. You're going to hear me say through a lot of my presentation today, the importance of communication, being on the same page. I appreciate you guys being here. That situation should have never happened, but it happened on one of our biggest stages, and it was really pretty embarrassing for us. Okay, I'm going to get into my presentation today, and I'm going to talk through a couple of things. We're going to talk a lot about sportsmanship and what we've been trying to do to improve that. We're going to talk a lot about officials issues, and hopefully we're going to have some time at the end where you can kind of pepper me with some questions. Okay, this is our staff of assistant ADs, and Joseph Garman and Grace McDowell specifically, I want to point them out to you. They are our assistant athletic directors that are in charge of basketball. They do a tremendous job. Both of them played basketball, high school, college. Grace coached basketball in college and in high school. Joseph was a head basketball coach in high school. They bring a lot of basketball experience to the table, and they're very passionate about the sport. More importantly, I think all three of these folks are great people, and they work really hard for you guys and also for the kids of this state. You can kind of see, again, their areas of oversight, and I'm not going to spend much time on it, but they do a tremendous job for our team. Beyond them, and Calvin and some of these others know the rest of our staff, these four folks do just an incredible job for our team, and really nobody knows who they are. We have three event coordinators, Jessica Walker, Hannah Higgins, and Sydney Johnson, and then our coordinator of officials is Dylan Bankston. Dylan is a very young guy, he is a very young guy, and we've given him a lot of responsibility when it comes to officials and officiating, and I would hope that everybody that really deals with him would say he does a tremendous job of taking care of officials and honoring officials and making sure that they feel important and that their needs are taken care of. He's really good at what he does, and we're hoping to grow his role over time as he grows into the role, but he does a great job for us. We came into this year with this focus, and I think it's important for you guys to hear what's important to us. As a coach, I always felt like we needed to have a plan. And our plan coming into this year, you got to remember, I coached for a long time. I was an athletic director. I felt like I knew the things that the UIL did really, really well, but I also felt like I knew some things that we weren't doing as well. As a customer, I was a customer, right? As a coach and as an administrator, I was a customer of UIL processes. And I felt like we could do a better job of communicating. Today's an important part of that, right? Being willing to get out on the road and talk to people and engage with them and meet with them and face to face, that's an important part of this. I felt we needed to do a better job of communicating. I also felt like, it's one thing to go out and give one-way communication. It's another thing to actually work with people to get better. So we wanted to collaborate in a more effective manner. And then there was an old joke when I was coaching that if you want a different answer from the UIL, you call a different person. So, it's kind of like a little kid. If they don't get the right answer from dad, well, who do they go to? Maybe mom. I know when my kids did that to me, I bust their rear end, right? But we wanted to be better and we wanted to be consistent so that when somebody called the UIL, whether they called me or they called Grace or they called Joseph, they're going to get the same answer every time. And that answer is a correct answer. So we came into the year with this being our focus. And these are some things that we did this year. We really hit the road strong last summer. We went to many things. I've been to, I can't even count how many TASO and board meetings that I've been to of certain types this year. We went out to our AD's conference. Of course, the coaching association, pretty much every major coaching association, we've gone out and we've had visits just like I'm visiting with you. Okay, we have really tried to increase our communication to school districts to make sure that there's a greater understanding of the rules and processes and specifically about sportsmanship. And you're going to see in a second what we're asking school districts to do in regards to sportsmanship. We've had a collaborative process involving really a lot of entities with sportsmanship, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that here in a second. And we've put a priority on customer service. And I would hope that those that engage with us directly really can see that and feel that we're trying to serve and be better for everyone, and that includes you. We recognized immediately that our resources need to improve. And so one of the first things that I noticed is, you know what? I know that the atmosphere at our contest has, as an AD, I saw it, especially after COVID, that we were having problems. People were just angry. And I would go out to a middle school basketball game and I would see a young assistant principal who had just been hired and then being asked by themselves to go be a game administrator of 2 gyms. And I would walk into those gyms and you could tell that she was scared to death and didn't know what to do, right? So, what we tried to do is say, what could we create a resource that schools could use where they could throw that down if they don't know what to do, so that they at least know what they should be doing so that they could then act with confidence in their role and responsibility as a game administrator. So we published quickly in the fall game administrator training and we distributed it out to every school district. You guys, I hope, know this. I get every incident report that comes in. So when you fill out a negative incident report, that goes into my email. I'm going to tell you guys, very often I feel punch drunk from negative incident reports. And it's very easy in my role to kind of get jaded about, you would think that everything's going to hell in a handbasket because all you hear a lot of times is a negative. I wanted to hear the positive because I felt even though the volume of negative was high, there were thousands upon thousands of games that were happening and we never heard that something really good happened. So we created an incident report where people like yourselves could go out to a game, and if you had a great experience, you could quickly take 5 minutes and send us a note and recognize the place where you were treated well. Okay? When we did that in the fall, in the first week, we had 60 positive incident reports submitted by officials, the very first week that we rolled it out. I'm going to tell you, just opening my email felt so much better. But what we were able to do then is, as officials were reporting back to us that they were having a positive experience, we were able to then recognize school districts and thank them for what they were doing for officials. And what I'm hoping over time is that's going to be a reinforcing action. to where they're going to want to do things like that. And we're going to look to expand and try to recognize school districts that are doing things the right way publicly as we move forward. I started looking, and I've told this, and this is going to be kind of for my sportsmanship part, but I got in the job 2 weeks. I've been there for a year at the UIL. I was there 2 weeks, and Daryl Beasley, our director of compliance, sent me an email, and it was a spreadsheet that listed all of the data related to ejections of students, coaches, fans, numbers of incident reports that have been submitted, and it showed from year over year, like that data. I started looking at the spreadsheet, and to be honest with you, again, I told you I've known as an administrator that behavior has gotten worse, but seeing the numbers startled me. I'm going to review some of these numbers with you later, but we knew we had a problem. Now I had numbers to prove that we had a problem. I'm getting these incident reports, and we started noticing in the fall with football, a lot of our numbers of ejections were going up because we were having these large-scale ejection incidents. And I'm going to describe a large-scale ejection incident. Fight on the court, 2 kids fighting, and 20 kids running off the 2 benches. And then now you have 22 kids out there fighting. Most officials, game administrators, and coaches can deal with 2 kids. It's an explosive and a dynamic situation when there are 22 kids out there on the floor fighting. And when there are 22 kids physically fighting, what does that do with the parents that are in the stands? They come on the floor too, right? Because they're scared for their kids. And now you have a really dangerous situation. So in Cy-Fair, when I was the AD, I made our coaches come up with a protocol and practice. If we have a negative incident on the field or on the court, how are we going to react to that? Who's going to be the assigned coach to go get the kid that's fighting? And then which coaches are then going to restrain the bench? Because again, if we could just deal with the kids that are on the court, we could probably take care of that if we can keep the kids on the bench. So we felt like we had that whipped, but I'm seeing all these problems. We had a sub-varsity game in Dallas, football game, where over 60 kids were ejected in one incident. Why was that? Because by rule, they left the bench and they were ejected. So we created bench, sideline, dugout protocol guidance. We sent it out to our schools, and we're asking our schools to practice with their teams so that when we have a negative incident on the court or on the field, people act according to their training and not to their emotions. Okay, we created that in the fall. We're trying to get our DECs better. If you have really a bad incident, first place it goes is to a local DEC. And I'm going to tell you, we've got a lot of improving to do when it comes to DEC processes. So we've put together DEC training. We've updated our website. Again, we've tried to do a lot to be better. And the question that I'm going to ask you, and please don't bombard me at the back end of this conversation today, is, but I need to hear from you guys, how can we be better for you? Because we're trying to be better for every constituent. And I think those that have dealt most closely with us, I hope that they feel that way and see that. Okay, talking about sportsmanship. From the 17-18 school year to the 22-23 school year, there was a 100% increase in player ejections due to misconduct. 100%. That's startling, okay? You can look at what our number was in 22-23, and again, I mentioned I saw that data in June. When I started going out to officiating meetings and coaching conventions last summer, I started saying that we needed to improve our sportsmanship of our kids, our adults, our coaches, spectators, and I was naive. I thought in talking about this, things would get better. Embarrassingly for me, this wasn't on my watch, right? You can see what our numbers were this year. Did things get better this year? The numbers say they didn't, right? So we had a 10% increase this year. It was less of an increase than what we've seen in previous years. We at least we were going like this, if that makes sense. We kind of went like this. You know, we're going to try to think that that's a little bit of a win, but until we actually see a decrease, we're going to keep working on it. We've had a 45% increase in those same time period where officials are saying that guy has got to go. Y'all know that the bulk of ejections are not official initiated. They're usually game administrator initiated, or somebody from the school is saying, hey, you need to leave. I don't know if I've been at that many games where officials have actually said, hey, you need to leave. It happens, but it rarely happens. But 45% increase, 50% increase in coach ejections over 10 years. Okay, and then when you combine, well, what's the impact on officials? When I went to a TASO board meeting, this statistic kind of got my attention. You know, Mike Fitch is saying that they've had a 20% loss of officials. They don't even make it through 1 year. 20%. That's not sustainable when we love athletics. Our state's getting bigger. We're opening more schools. We have more games. This is not sustainable. You can see our top 4 sports as far as incidents and problems: football, basketball, probably not telling you guys anything, soccer, and baseball. But we figured out, like in volleyball, we don't have hardly any ejections in volleyball. Can you imagine why? When they don't touch each other, nobody gets mad. When there's a net between them, nobody gets mad. So if we could play basketball without them touching each other, y'all would be good. Parents, a lot calmer in volleyball. Everything's better. Okay, so I mentioned, and I'm just going to quickly go through this. This is this year's numbers, and I want to point out one thing. I want to point out the positive. If you look at our basketball numbers in boys basketball and girls basketball, this is last year. So we did have a slight decrease this year in basketball. I'm going to take that as a little bit of a win. But if you look at it, we had an increase with our parents. I'm going to say our parents or our spectators being ejected. Okay, so am I telling anybody anything that they don't know in this room? Probably not. Okay. Okay, so what did we do about it? I've already mentioned some of these things. We talked about it last summer a lot. Okay, we talked about it. We published the game administrator resources. We went out to almost every AD meeting and we said, hey, at the beginning of the year, we need you to have a sports-specific plan as a school district. We started sending out emails to every group of coaches. So like when we started basketball season, this is basketball referees in here, we sent an email before practice started and we listed all of the ejection numbers from last year, and we talked about sideline protocols, and we talked about the importance of working on sportsmanship. Then in the middle of the season, we sent another email to all basketball coaches, everybody that coaches basketball in the state, and we gave them a sportsmanship update. And at the end of the season, we sent them another email. Okay, I know it's an email, but it's communication where we're constantly trying to put this information in front of coaches. We continue to look at data. Now we're not waiting until June to get the numbers. I was getting an update on ejection numbers every 2 weeks. I mentioned Dylan. Dylan's giving me an update every 2 weeks, letting me know how things are going. We're not trying to wait till the end of the year. Well, I talked about the good sportsmanship reporting form, and I'm going to tell you, beyond me wanting to have some good news, the other thing I wanted to do, and I told Mike Fitch this, and I mentioned this to Eddie Hopkins, I wanted officials to start changing their mindset and go out to games looking for the good. Because sometimes if you're looking for the bad, you're going to find it, right? But if you look for the good, that kind of helps your perspective. I talked about the bench and sideline protocol. And I'm going to say this, we're about to release new coaches training. All of our coaches have to take required training every year. That's about to come out next Monday. All of our coaches training has been reworked to heavily talk about sportsmanship. And then finally, by the time that we got to the early spring, I mentioned I was looking at that data every 2 weeks. I realized, hey, you know what? We're probably not in a great spot. And I said, talking about this is not getting it done. And so I had a meeting in Austin, and I asked the following groups to show up: TASO, THSBOA, Basketball Coaches Association, High School Coaches Association, Athletic Directors Coaching Association, Baseball Coaches Association. And I got them in one room and I said, guys, I showed them all the same things that I showed you. And I said, we need to do something together. And it needs to be more than talk. We need help. And I asked them specifically, what can your organization do? What are you going to commit to do to help improve the issue? Because we all have a stake in it. Okay. And I also asked, when we started with this, what are the outcomes that we're trying to work towards? And so from coaches, from athletes, from officials, and we made up a document. And then I said, okay, if this is what we want to move towards, what do you need to do to get us there? Okay. There's some good things that have come from that, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So I mentioned earlier, I thought it was important that you know what we've asked schools to do. Okay, when I go talk to, I just went to the Athletic Directors Association conference. First session had over 600 athletic administrators across the state of Texas were in that room, all different levels. And so what did I ask them to do in regards to sportsmanship? First of all, I reminded them that these are supposed to be educational events. Kids are supposed to be learning from them. And in my estimation, we can't have positive outcomes if we don't have a positive atmosphere. If we have people cursing up in the stands, if we have kids acting poorly on the floor, if our community see kids rushing off of the bench and physically fighting with one another, that's not a positive atmosphere, and it's going to be hard for us to have a positive outcome. And I've asked our schools, and this is the first thing, and I hope that you're going to see more of this. I ask school districts to be more explicit in their expectations for their communities. So in the fall, I'm going to give you an example. NSISD, after we had been talking about sportsmanship, they had a little bit of an incident at a game. Their athletic director got fed up. He published a letter to their community, and he said, this is what we're about in Ennis, Texas. This is what we're going to be about, and this is what we're not going to tolerate, and this is what's going to happen if you cross that line. Okay? It was awesome. Shortly after that, several other school districts published similar letters to their communities. Okay, I don't care how school districts do it, but what we're asking them to do is to physically communicate with their community and explain what is their expectations when the public shows up to one of our contests. Okay, the next thing, you can type the greatest of letters, you can be stern in a letter, but if you're not willing to have some courage and go up and deal with the person that's acting in an inappropriate manner, it really does not matter. Okay, if you're not willing to say to a parent, you know what, I know that this is your child, but you need to go, you need to have time out. You need to go away for a few games, and then we're going to give you another opportunity. And if it happens again, then you're going to go away for a long time. Okay, we don't need to be about zero tolerance, but we do need to be about high expectations. So we need to be willing to act and hold people accountable to our stated values and expectations. I think that's important. Okay, what we have been doing has not been working, right? So we need to do something different. We need to be creative. We need to try some new things. I think that game administration and security resources are key. Right now, the UIL rule is that you have to have a game administrator for a varsity basketball game. I'm just talking about basketball right now. For sub-varsity, it's suggested that you have a game administrator. Okay, I mentioned the thousands upon thousands of games that we had in Cy-Fair ISD. As the athletic director there, I told our superintendent, we've got to have a game administrator at every contest. And at the ones that are going to be the hottest, where we know it's going to be an issue, we're going to have multiple people there. And I had to sell that to our. So we're trying to work towards higher expectations for game administration and security and communication beforehand, because every single major incident that we had last year, the common denominator, the number one comment that was said was, it happened so fast. Like, it happened so fast, we didn't even know what to do. And what they were doing was reacting instead of responding to their training, if that makes sense. So you've got to have a trained response to deal with these problems when spectators run onto the floor, etc. Okay, I've asked, just like I asked the school district or the associations, what are they going to do this year to specifically improve their outcomes? Like, they need to develop a system and a plan. Okay. All right, officials. All right, this has been talked about, and I'm going to tell you what we kind of had the dialogue when TASO and THSBOA were in that meeting. How can you help? Well, number one, and I don't know if you've heard about this yet, but this is rolling out. The Texas High School Coaching Association and the Athletic Directors Association work together with Stephen Mackey, if you know who Stephen Mackey is, to publish a curriculum called the Texas Way. Okay, that's going to be rolled out here. It was rolled out at the AD's conference. It's going to be really rolled out at the High School Coaching Association Summer Convention. Okay, it's going to be absolutely free for schools, and it's going to be designed to help teach students and adults and communities and parents what the expectations are related to sportsmanship. And there's 3 simple principles. It's really simple language. It's language that everybody can use and we can all be on the same page. I'm really excited about this. It's the first time there's been anything concrete put out there to address sportsmanship. Every major association, officiating association, and coaching association in our state has endorsed the use of the Texas way. Okay, and I think that you guys, whether you are TASO official, or which I think the majority of you guys are in here, or THSBOA, I think that you're going to hear a lot about the Texas way in the coming couple of months. I know TASO in particular has done some really creative things that they're doing where they've gone to Stephen and they've asked for official-specific curriculum so that officials could go through the coursework and learn as well and be recognized for being Texas Way certified officials. Okay, I think this, and I'm just going to talk more generally. I'm going to move away from the Texas Way deal. I think that as an official, the number one thing that you can do is have positive and proactive communication. Communication solves a lot. Okay, Calvin knows this, that during the state basketball tournament, I sit right there at the table and I'm listening at all times, right? And I'm watching coaches coach and I'm watching how officials officiate. And you can see master officials, how they handle coaches, some coaches that are rough, right? You can handle a lot with some proactive communication. And you don't have to show anybody up to do that. I would never think that I'm not an official. I don't know much about it. But I know, again, working with people, and I see master officials work with people in an effective manner to de-escalate situations and get things moving in a positive direction. I think that this is important. We talked about de-escalation. I think, again, sometimes to de-escalate a situation, you got to remove yourself and your own ego out of a situation. I'm going to tell you, every single day as a UIL athletic director, I've got to swallow my pride and my ego, not say what I would like to say, sometimes in certain situations, and try to work towards a positive outcome every day. Okay, I think that's what people that are trying to be effective and work towards an effective outcome need to do. I've seen this, and you guys have seen it. I've seen officials time and time again, and this is probably the norm, solve problems with positive communication. I've also seen officials create problems with negative communication. Okay, I mentioned about being an athletic director in Cy-Fair. The number one thing that we were serviced by a THSBOA chapter. And if I ever had a problem at a game where an official had acted inappropriately, again, positive communication, I could call Marvin Webb and I could talk to Marvin and we could talk offline about what happened. And I trusted him and he trusted me. At the same time, if something went bad at one of our schools and one of his officials were mistreated, Marvin could pick up the phone and could call me and say, hey, we had a bad experience. And I think he had confidence that we were going to handle it and make a correction. I think that that's important, but we got to be about de-escalation. Okay, I'm going to say this is very important. I mentioned the incident reports. I'm going to ask you guys, I think timely reporting is super important. All right. You guys are officiating a sport that plays twice a week. I think that the old standard for reporting incidents, I believe, was 48 hours, right? At the last officiating meeting that we had, soccer meeting that we had, we moved that to 24 hours. And the reason it's 24 hours, I know that that creates a hardship, but if you think about, here's what was happening a lot of times. Incident happens on Tuesday night. You're getting an incident report late Thursday in the workday, and the kid's about to play on Friday. And now you're having to try to call to say, hey, like, what happened? And you're just now starting the investigation and working with the campus maybe Friday morning. Okay, if we are going to be there to support you guys, I think it's important that we have timely reporting. And I think that when something really goes bad, all 3 officials on the court, or all 2 officials of a sub-varsity, all of them need to report because everybody's going to have a different perspective. Okay, those reports, you guys know, can be filled out pretty quickly, but that's important. Okay, I mentioned the positive incident reports. I'm going to also ask this. I know you're all busy. You all have jobs. You have families. You're sacrificing for kids by going out there and officiating, and it's hard. And I really think that basketball is the toughest sport to officiate that we have. I really believe that. Okay, I know how hard it is. I'm going to ask you to, when school districts do it right, that you recognize those school districts. It would literally take you 5 minutes. And we need to be recognizing, promoting the good and reinforcing the positive actions from school districts. Okay, again, mentioned we got to be about low ego and high output. And I think you're doing this. You know, I would think, and I've said this often, that the number one thing that takes care of problems with parents and issues is a competent official. When you have great competence and skill out there on the court, it doesn't solve every foolish behavior in the stands, but it goes a long way to creating confidence and solving problems. And what you're doing here today and tomorrow, this weekend, to improve your training, to sharpen your sword, is going to help you improve. And that's what we should all be doing, right? We should be trying to get better over time. Okay, Bert asked me, you know, what have we seen? Would you talk a little bit about what you've seen across the state that different chapters are doing to increase the numbers of officials? So I'm going to share with you some things. This is number one thing. This has come up. A lot of different chapters across the state are now directly going to college campuses because a lot of those college students have direct discretionary time and are going directly to like a kinesiology department or students that are involved with sports and recruiting officials on the campus as they're going to school. Okay, they might not be the people that are officiating varsity ball games, but they might be able to go out and do a middle school game. And you're building new officials in that way. You've got a couple of universities right here. My suggestion would be for anybody that's involved in leadership in this chapter is start having dialogue, if you haven't already done it, with those schools, because I think that that's huge. Okay, we've even had some that go to job fairs, high school career days, and that's actually proved to be pretty fruitful. This is big, and I think that you're going to see an explosion of this, and this is something that we're really pushing as the UIL, is that more and more school districts are now having high school officiating classes. You can now earn a high school credit. It's TEA approved. There's a TEA approved course that you can take. And there's a couple of school districts that are doing a tremendous job in churning out a lot of officials, where those officials are actually going and being student workers now and working games, making good money doing it. Okay, we need more young people in this profession. Okay, Dylan sends out a weekly Become an Official report to all chapter representatives. We have a little link on our website where people over time will say, hey, I'm interested in officiating. And every week, Dylan's, if it's somebody from your area, Dylan would send your chapter a report and say, hey, this guy expressed an interest, or this lady expressed an interest in officiating. Okay, we have seen a market uptick in the people responding to this request over the last 2 to 3 months. Okay, our communications team 2 weeks ago put out just a Twitter post, or an X post, I guess I should say now. I'm old, so I say Twitter. And we saw immediate uptick in the number of people that were responding to the Become an Official deal. And so what I told our communications people is we need to be doing that more frequently. Okay, so the big thing is, though, is I think the follow-up is the key. We can send an email to you, but do you have a process for then trying to immediately connect with those people before they change their mind? And how can you make becoming an official easy for them? How can you make it as frictionless as possible? A lot of chapters are now using social media and the radio. That's becoming cheaper and cheaper to do. And again, you know you're the number one recruiter for officials. I would say this, though, towards the statistic that I threw out there earlier, it's one thing to get them started. It's more important that you keep them once they get started. So how do you do that? Do you assign a mentor to them? Do you have a way of coaching them up once they get started? I think that's important. Okay, this is the fun part. I get to talk about, and he asked me, and I really appreciate Bert asking me to do this, is to ask, well, what would be your expectations for game assignments and for game officials? Okay, I think you're doing the first thing. You're always improving, creating confidence. You're a professional. Okay, very important. If you're a TASO member, in order to actually do a contest, you got to be fully compliant with their procedures and processes. You got to stay current. You need to be in good standing. Okay, you need to avoid any conflict of interest. And you guys would not imagine how many problems that we have when it comes to conflict of interest. You know, you need to speak up when there's an issue. If you're going out and your nephew or your second cousin is out there on the court, you can't be on the same court. It creates an issue. And the perception of a conflict of interest is a problem. Okay, just as much as the real conflict of interest. Again, need to abide by UIL rules, including the fee schedule and travel reimbursement. There have been a lot of people that have done a lot of work to try to get a graduated increase. And I know that you're not paid enough right now. I acknowledge that. But there's at least a plan for gradual increase over time. And it took a lot of hard work to get that in place, but you need to not abuse that system. And then we've talked a lot about positive communication. I'm gonna mention this, that if you're a crew chief and you're gonna go out to a campus, I think it's important that you have communication with those coaches prior to going out to their game. And that could be as simple as a quick email. It doesn't have to be complicated, but you're setting the stage for a good night early. And I think that that's important. We've already talked about the reporting of incidents within 24 hours. Okay, I was asked to talk about this. There are several times Dylan will send out and we're asked to assign, two coaches can't agree on an assignment. And so we'll get with the chapter. And this was talked about a second ago. Okay, if we contact, and this is a problem, I'm just going to be honest now. Okay, if we contact a chapter, we're expecting the chapter to send their best. Okay, the game is about kids. All right, the game is not about adults. All right, and I'm going to tell you, I get upset at going to some of our officials' board meetings, sometimes I listen very carefully to what adults are saying, and a lot of times what I'm hearing are about adult concerns and issues. And I'm kind of raising my hand saying, well, like, we need to have the best. Okay, and you need to compete to be the best in your chapter. And then your chapter needs to send the best. It shouldn't be a rotating system where everybody gets some, in my estimation. Okay? Now, I might be stepping on toes, but I think that's important. Okay? I was also... repeat that one more time. I think the chapters need to send their best, and I think that officials need to compete to be the best. We're in a competitive arena. You know, I was an athlete. I was a coach for 20 years. You know, there were a lot of times I didn't have the best kids, but I needed to compete to be my best, right? I needed to try hard. And I think that you guys, again, I know I'm probably preaching to the choir here. I think that we need to have the same expectations, but I don't think I'm saying anything that you don't know. A lot of times chapter politics get in the way. Those elections for presidents and secretaries and things like that get in the way of doing what's right. And chapter politics can't get in the way of what's best for kids. Okay, Bert asked me to talk about scratch and scratch policies. Okay, this is a sensitive subject. Okay, he also mentioned to you that I was a coach, right? All right, I think it's important that coaches have some ability, if there's been a problem, to say, hey, this has been a problem. I don't think it would be healthy for this official to be there. I mentioned the conversations that I would have with Marvin. There were some times when I would call Marvin, and it was not very often, where we had some really bad incidents with some adults that did not act appropriately. And I would ask Marvin off the record, Marvin, we can't have this guy back. So it was a problem. It was inappropriate. Now, he also called me and said, Ray, your folks didn't do a good enough job. You need to fix it or we're not coming back. Right? And so both of those conversations are important. So I want to talk a little bit about scratch and scratch policies. I think that common sense needs to prevail. I'm going to give you an example from another sport that has nothing to do with your sport. We had a situation this year where we had a coach in the North Texas area in totally another sport that was not acting appropriately and treating officials or really anybody right, to be quite honest with you. Gone through disciplinary process, etc. Contentious situation with the local chapter. And before the season, he scratches the chapter president and a host of other people in the chapter. Like, not one or two people, quite a few people. Okay? So what do you think the chapter did? The chapter said, you know what? We're independent contractors. And I'm going to tell y'all, I hate that term. We're independent contractors because I don't think anybody's truly independent from anybody else. We're all dependent on each other. And we're not going to come out to we're not going to service your school district. So what's happening here? Coach not handling things right? Not handling not handling the ability to scratch an official or two when you're having an issue, doesn't handle that right. So he's escalating the situation. What did the chapter do in response to that? They're escalating the situation, and here we go, right? And meanwhile, what's happening with those kids? They don't have anybody to call their games. And the superintendent's calling us, and he's wanting to use a chapter that's not recognized. I said, nope, we're not going to do that. We're not going to go to a chapter that's not recognized. You need to, and we'll help, but we need to go back to the chapter and solve this problem. We need to work together. So more times than not, I think that common sense needs to prevail. Coaches, and this is, I'm going to tell you, I'm talking to officials now, but this is what I tell coaches. Coaches cannot be indiscriminately scratching large numbers of officials at a time when we don't have enough officials. That's ignorant, right? Okay. If coaches are doing that, we've had chapters reach out to us. I don't mind calling coaches and having a conversation. And I did it this year, having a conversation. Hey, coach, hey, what are we doing? I think more times than not, common sense could prevail when it comes to this. I don't think we need to get rid of a scratch policy. We need to make sure that a scratch policy is being operated effectively and appropriately. Okay, I do think this relationship building and communication is the key. I've said communication, I don't know how many times. If you're in any type of leadership in the chapter here, I think the more that you can do to have a positive relationship with the athletic directors in your area, in the school districts that you service, I think that you're going to solve a lot of problems. Okay, I really believe that when this is done right, that school districts and officiating chapters can work together for a common good. I've seen it happen, and I think it's important. And I just mentioned this already. If you experience a problem, and I heard them say, hey, we got a lot of coaches doing it, okay, try to work through the situation, communicate into it, but if we're not getting any traction, call Dylan Bankston, call me, let us try to do our jobs and go to work, okay? Because this is important, and I know there's probably strong feelings about this, I'll take any questions just on this right now before we move on.
On the scratches,
Yes.
I do have one question. There's two types of scratches that I'm aware of. You have coaches who call the chapter president or the chapter assigner says, I don't want XYZ. Fine, we deal with it that way. Then you have a coach who may be upset about a call, send in a scratch, and then we get the response to that scratch, but all they're doing is scratching it over. They're not giving any detail.
That's been a common complaint, and that's inappropriate, right? Because here's the other thing too. If you're going to go to the point to where you're actually saying that this professional, I'm requesting that this professional not come back, there should be some very specific information attached to that, so that the chapter and that official can look to see if there's any merit to the concern that's out there. If you find that that's not happening, okay, again, I think it should be chapter leadership working with that school district, not maybe even taking a step back, give it a day or so, let it breathe a little bit, and coming back and saying, hey, we're here, you got a problem, but we can't help you with your problem if you don't talk to us and let us know what we did wrong here. And I don't know how many times, and guys, I coached for a long time. I was assistant coach for a long time. And in the heat of a game, someone said, I'm never having you back. I'm never having you back, right? I mean, I can hear it. I probably said it. Okay. But I'm going to tell you, it's one thing to say that it's inappropriate. It's poor sportsmanship. It's lack of control over yourself. It's not being a positive example. But it's one thing to say that in the heat of a moment. It's another thing to then let that deal breathe. And then the next day you're actually scratching an official without good reason. Okay. So we're gonna try to do what I'm doing with you guys, which is when we talk to coaches, we're gonna try to ensure that we're giving them the same message that I'm giving you.
The reason why I bring that up, Coach, is this. When we're scratched, when the signer says, okay, you're not going to XYZ school because of whatever issue, fine. I don't know about everybody here, but the way I take it, when my name gets associated with UIL, that becomes pretty personal to me. And I want to make sure that if my name is on the scratch sheet to UIL, I want to make sure the UIL who's doing the call-in investigation understand what transpired for that to reach that level of a scratch.
Well,
That's a high-profile scratch to me.
have some confidence in this. Now, if it's a common scratch, and again, I might be getting way out of my lane. I've been there a year, right? Okay, but if it's probably and a coach is just saying, hey, I'm scratching this person, and it's not attached to a major incident, we're without any backstory or a chapter calling Dylan or calling me, we're probably moving on, right? If it's attached to a major incident, or we get questioned by, like, let's say Mike or Eddie Hopkins, we're going to call directly. And when I say, hey, we're willing to speak into some things and work with you guys and work with schools to be the outsider that's not really in the middle of the situation, we're willing to do that. Yes, sir. Did you have something? Okay. Yes, sir.
I appreciate you sharing this with us. One thing that I want to give you as a solution, you said something about coaches using it as a weapon. I seen it, where they say, we're going to do this to you, or I don't want you. They do it for players. I get the varsity, and I think there should be an automatic tech goal once a coach, assistant coach does that during the game. That's just me. But where it hurts us is the varsity. I mean, the sub varsity games where you have a JV coach saying, hey, I don't want him anymore. I think we really got to work on that, and we could.
No doubt.
But it needs to be when he's doing that in a game, we should automatically give him a technical, or they verbalize it. That needs to come out of it. Because
We're probably a little bit away from that, but I hear you, and I don't necessarily agree that you're wrong. I'm going to tell you what we tell school districts when it comes to sub-varsity games, and I'm going to start with what was my message as an athletic director in Cy-Fair to our middle school coaches. I started with them, and then moving up. If it's a sub-varsity game, you shut your mouth. Okay, I'm pretty plain speaking. All right, we've got people that are learning and growing. Right, they don't have enough people. We need to be thankful that we have an official so that you can do what you love to do. They're not going to be perfect. You're not perfect. You're learning and growing too as a coach. You need to be quiet. Okay. What we're telling school districts, and when I talk to those ADs and we talk about sportsmanship, is we're telling them that they need to be explicit in their expectations for coaches, especially sub-varsity coaches, because the way that some sub-varsity coaches are handling their business is not appropriate. Okay. Now, I would suggest that it's definitely not appropriate for a varsity coach to be acting in that manner. But you absolutely can't act that way if you're a you're 7th grade B team basketball. Come on now. Like, come on, man.
along the same lines, when Coach varsity coach says, I don't want you stepping on my campus, what he's saying is, I don't want you doing sub varsity freshman. We should not be allowed to say that to us. And they do say that. And they said to me, I've heard that. And then they'll call a sub signer and say, I don't want him anywhere on my campus. That's not should not be happening, and we should not allow that to happen.
Now, I'm gonna suggest this, so too. I'm gonna suggest the flip side of that. I don't disagree with you, and I've told you that we've talked to individual school districts this year, right? That's happened. But there's also been some times, and I mentioned sometimes, I'm not going to get into the specifics, where we had some officials act so egregiously that they didn't belong on a court, where they're making inappropriate comments to young ladies, where they're going back and forth with parents in the stands, where they lit the fuse to get it going instead of staying within themselves. So I agree with you, but I think every situation is different. Common sense, though, should prevail in these situations. And that's what we're trying to work towards. We're not there yet. Okay, but I want you guys to have confidence in the words that I'm saying, in the method, in the manner that I'm saying it, so that you walk away from here feeling like, hey, you know what, we're going to be supported. Okay, some additional attributes for officials. Again, we just talked about this, right? Respect for all participants. The integrity, that goes without saying. And this, I'm going to mention this. being prepared for your role. I don't know how many games I went to at Sci-Fair, and I went. We played varsity basketball 4 days a week in Houston, in Sci-Fair, because we had one district that was playing on Tuesday, Friday, and the other district played on Wednesday, Saturday, and we played middle school basketball Monday, Thursday. I would go to a basketball game every day of the week as an athletic director during basketball season. And I saw a lot of great officials, and I also saw some officials, especially at middle school games, that never crossed half court, ever. And were not in shape, quite honestly, to be officiating. Okay, that does not create confidence. I know. I can hear from the murmurs. Y'all seen peers, right? We need to be willing at a time. I know when we're short with officials, we need to be willing to hold each other accountable to a high standard. And if somebody's not hustling on the court, that needs to be addressed, especially if it's a repeat deal. I think that's very important. Okay, we just talked about hustle, fitness, being in position to make calls, right? Parents are always going to yell, but you're giving parents something to yell about when you never get in appropriate position and you're making a call that's happening under the basket all the way over there, that last table, and you're right here. That's impossible. Now, there's probably a foul. Don't get me wrong. But it doesn't create confidence when you have that much distance away from the foul itself. Professionalism. You're representing your area. You're representing yourself. You're representing us. And then I'm going to suggest this, and I don't mean to step on anybody's toes, but as a coach, I had to realize this too. The competition was never about me. I used to tell our coaches as a staff, I would tell them, you know what, we're going to have other games. We're going to be able to continue to coach. We'll have other nights. We'll have other games. We'll have other years. But these kids only have a few years. And they remember those games the rest of their life. I remember my games today. And I'm 30 years removed from it. It's always going to be about the kids. But I'm going to suggest this. Y'all are an integral part of what we do. We cannot do, and I say this to coaches all the time, you can't do what you're passionate about if there's not an official out there on the field and court. You can't do it. So you better treat them right. Okay, I want to mention this. I'm going to do this quickly. I'm short on time here. I want to take some questions. You guys might have heard about this. I know this really doesn't have anything to do with what we're kind of talking about today, but we just passed probably a very big piece of legislation, probably the biggest piece of legislation that's been passed in probably 20 years at the UIL, passed last week. Okay, several of our sports beyond football were asking for multiple state two pathways to state championships in each classification. And I'm going to tell you how they asked it. We want what football has, right? We want what football has. So they're getting what football has. All right. Dr. Breidup, who is retiring, our executive director, came to us right before the state tournament. We're trying to get ready for the state tournament. And he said, I know we're pointing towards 2026 and the next realignment to do this. I know we've already released an alignment and a calendar. It's time to do this. Coaches have been asking for this. It's time now. So he said, you guys go figure it out. So we figured out a way of getting that. So volleyball, starting with this fall, boys basketball, girls basketball, soccer, baseball and softball, every team in team tennis and water polo still does not have enough teams to really support 2 full brackets. Okay. With basketball, it will be all classifications, 1A through 6A, because we have enough basketball teams in the state in class 1A to support 2 brackets. We do not have enough teams in 1A in the other sports to support 2 brackets. Okay. So again, in class 6A in basketball this fall, there will be 2 state champions. And how are we going to do that? They're going to compete against each other in their districts. You're going to certify your 4 playoff teams just like you've always done, using your tiebreakers just as they've been. And after you certify those 4 teams, the 2 largest teams by their enrollment last October are going to go to the Division I bracket, and the 2 smallest are going to go to the Division II bracket. Okay, what's that going to do to the playoff brackets? We're going to have by district and area just like we have had in basketball the first week. I'm going to just talk about basketball now to speed this up. So first week of playoffs, by district and area, front end, back end of the week, just like we've always done. The next week, instead of having a regional quarterfinal round, since we split off into 2 brackets with less teams, it goes immediately to regional semifinals. The next round is regional finals. with us doubling the amount of teams in the actual regional championships, there's no way for us to coordinate that many regional tournaments. So mandatory regional tournaments are going away this year. But if the 4 teams left after week 1 want to say, hey, we're going to get together on the back end of that second week and we're going to pick a site and we're going to have a Friday, Saturday regional tournament, they absolutely can do that. Does that make sense? Or there have been some coaches that have said, you know what, I don't like regional tournaments because I'm playing in the biggest games that I've ever played in, and I play Friday night and immediately I've got to turn around. Maybe it's overtime. I got to turn around and play again on Saturday. I haven't had a chance to game plan really, and my kids don't have their legs. So I like the idea of playing on a Tuesday and then coming back and playing in a regional final on Friday. Okay, here's the big change too. We were just talking about this. If y'all have ever been to the state tournament and worked the state tournament, that's been 18 contests, 6 a day. Okay, if we doubled the brackets, that would be 36 contests in a week, 6 a day, with teams that would be competing early in the morning and late at night. Okay, I was telling Calvin, I feel like sometimes at those days I'm walking into a casino. I go in, it's dark, I leave, it's dark. I don't even know what time of day it is. It's tough. We don't feel like we can do 36 games not at one site, not in 1 week. So this year it will be like the COVID year. State championship tournaments will be just state championships. Semifinals will be negotiated out, just like they always have been negotiated out. Okay, and then here's the final implication of this. You guys know right now we allow coaches to pick their officials for state semifinals, right? We have not allowed them to do that for state finals because they turn around the next day, you don't know what the matchup's going to be. There's not enough time for travel. More than likely, coaches are going to pick their officials all the way up to the state finals. Okay, so that's going to be a pretty big change. Now, this data, what is the main reason we're doing this? It's not because coaches are griping about it. It's we're trying to improve competitive equity. Okay? The data that we get from this, we think is going to really help us and tell us whether this model is something that we should continue as we move forward into the 2026 alignment or not. So we think this is going to be a really big deal for our kids, for the sports. It's going to be some major changes, but you're going to have double the number of playoff games really, and double the number of state championships. So it's going to be awesome. Any questions about this? Yes, sir. Uh-oh, we're standing up.
Yeah. Well, with that being said, that just wiped us out. And I'm talking from a real Grande, because I personally know the Corpus president. I personally know the B-Bill president, who's usually here as a representative or an evaluator. And it seems that UIL stops when it gets to Corpus. And we usually get left out because when it comes to coaches' picks, and I understand the reason why. We don't have teams that make it up there. So we don't have any representation. One, it's a really forgotten 300 and how many? 400 referees. We don't get picked for state semifinal crews. We're just now gaining traction on state finals, which I'm proud to say.
Which has been purposeful.
Yes, which has been great. But when it comes to coaches' pick, we never get picked.
Well, the one thing that has been that we are allowed to do a lot of times, though, when coaches can't agree, what happens? They allow us to pick. And the best thing that has happened is that you guys have done a number of games for us the last few years, right? And you've done a good job,
Yes.
right? So again, this is a work in progress, right? I told you the timeline. Calendar was already out. Alignment was already out, right? This is kind of where we are. All of this has not been fully decided, but the best thing that has happened for your chapter is that you guys have done a great job when you've been called upon. And I do think that we're going to have opportunities to continue to utilize your chapter. You know, and this is a 2-year trial run, right? And even the state championship games, like I mentioned, how the state tournament is structured might change even in year 2. We just can't change that quickly for this year coming up when we've got volleyball state championships in a few months. Okay?
Another question.
Yes, sir.
On the sites, though, what are y'all thinking if it's going to be that day, San Antonio again, or you want to go to San Antonio?
Staying for San Antonio now. We've got a contract. We were just talking about that too. I know San Antonio is really not a basketball venue, right? It's not, especially for the girls. It's tough in there. But we've got a 5-year contract, but we did negotiate an option after 3 years. So we're kind of looking at some different things. The best part about this, though, is you do have an opportunity for semifinals to be negotiated out and played at different places. So again, I think that's going to be something that's going to be helpful too, because teams are going to be able to stay at home and play closer to home. So I think that's going to help chapters all over the state. Yes, sir.
It's actually not officiating, but it's finding the classes. Why can't we have like a tournament of champions like New Jersey and New York? They have the lower class state champions play the other state champions. I mean, I'm more of a let's see who's the best.
Yeah. Well, it probably is just economy of scale though too, and I think a lot of it has to do with our, so the question was, why can't we, like in an Indiana or even New Jersey, could we not have a tournament of champions where you have different classifications playing against each other, either after there've been teams win state championships in their classification, etc. I don't know, those of you that are older, you don't seem to qualify for that, but can probably remember the Texas Cup. Been back a few years ago, there would be a playing of multiple state champions again, kind of against each other. That went away. I think a lot of it has to do just with the sheer size of what we're trying to do right now. Well, I hear you, but the flip side of that equation is this: there's going to be someone that loses that game, right? I get it. I get it. That's your perspective, though. I get it, but that's something we haven't been able to get a lot of consensus on. Okay, now I've really got to wrap up. Because I've got a flight to catch and I can't miss that. I'm actually moving tomorrow, and my butt's already in trouble with my wife from being down here today, the day before we move. So I do want to take a few questions. Just anything else that we haven't talked about. I hope that you felt like this has been a positive session for us. Anything else? Y'all have given me some good feedback today. I sincerely appreciate that. I know I'm leaving, I'm getting on a plane, right? But the dialogue and the conversation doesn't have to stop. Again, guys, thank you very much for having me today. It's been really an honor to be down here, and thank you for working to improve your craft and being better as an official. I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. Thank you so much.